couldn't make it tonight. So just know that programming will be recorded. And if you have any questions to Tina, the artist, you can use the Q&A box that appears in the bottom area of your screens to type it in. I'm a host tonight, and I will be looking at all the questions. And after Tina's talk is over with the screen share, I will be modulating through a couple questions that appears in our Q&A box. So please feel free to fill any of the questions in, and we'll go through those questions as much as our time allows. And before I introduce our Tina here, I would like to kind of give introductions about Forecast Public Arts. And a lot of you might know already who we are, but Forecast Public Art is a 42 years old nonprofit organization that activates and inspires and advocates for public art and advanced justice, human dignity, and health. The Forecast Public Arts envisions a future where all people feel a sense of belongings, realize their potential, and live healthy lives by embracing culture and creativities as drivers of the equitable change. And at the Forecast, we provides many different programs, and one of which is the artist talk tonight. But what we do is it curates and creates the thought-provoking contents through our Forecast Forward series and expand access of tool, resource opportunity, and funding for artists to work in the public spaces through our creative studio, especially centering the artists of color, indigenous artists, and groups that are traditionally excluded. Another program we run is the program and engagement work, which is helping to create accessible, equitable, and relevant public art policies, programs, and ordinance through our programming. And finally, we offer in-person and online learning opportunity for public artists, creatives, and affinity professionals through our Learning Institute, and work with communities to address inequities in all the facets to public arts through our Change Lab. And we tonight we are broadcasting tonight's program from Dakota land, and we would like to acknowledge all those who were here before and here now and here will be in the future. And if you'd like to know more about and learn more about how we can help create the visibility of Indigenous people, please check out illuminatives.org for more information. Very good websites. And we'd like to acknowledge tonight economic crisis facing artists during this pandemic. And tonight's Tina's work will kind of go through a little bit of how creatively think about this pandemic world in the virtual art making. Very excited to hear more about that, but we would like to acknowledge what is happening right now. And Forecast Public Arts like to offer a list of resources on our websites, not only the written resources, we have a pro bono consulting assistance to the public artists as well as organizations. So please check our websites out and sign up on those pro bono services Forecast Public Art is providing. And here's a couple announcements, because Forecast is not stopped working right now. We want to create more spaces that all the artists can be connected together. Starting April 25th, we are offering a series of Zoom meetups for Black, Indigenous, and person of color artists and organizer working in a community in the public spaces. So please look for our detail for how to join those Zoom meeting in our websites as well as the Facebook. And May 6th, Forecast is hosting a webinar in conjunction with the release of our latest toolkits, presenting the strategy for adapting in-person arts-based activity during the pandemics. So this is efforts to get a more way to be connected, and the toolkits that we'll be presenting in May 6th. And then lastly, May 21st, Miri Billiard, the visual public art and visual artist from Duluth, will be having a virtual artist talk. So when you have a moment, please tune into that artist talk as well. And that was a lot about Forecast. And now I am here to be very honored to be presenting our tonight's guest artist, Maria Cristina Tavera. And here's a little bit about Tina. We all actually know her as a Tina. So I'm going back and forth, Maria, Cristina, and Tina, excuse me. But Tina is a Latinx artist, independent curator, and cultural organizer influenced by her dual citizenship. Her citizenships in the United States and Mexico. As an artist, she creates the compositions with cultural signifier to examine the construction of race, ethnicity, gender, national, and cultural identity. Tavera has MA in Public Affairs and Leadership in the Arts from the University of Minnesota Humphrey School. She has received a fellowship and grants from the Bush Foundation, Smithsonian Latino Museum Study Program, Museum of Modern Arts, New York, Forecast Public Art, Minnesota State's Arts Board, Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, and Institute of Mexican Abroad. Tavera has exhibited and curated a show nationally and internationally. Her artwork can be found in the collection of the Wiseman Art Museum, Fargo Plenary Museum, Fargo Center, Augsburg University, and the Tweed Museum of Arts. As an independent curator, she prepared the international exhibition Sus Voice, Women Printmakers in Mexicota at the High Point for Printmaking, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And was co-curator for American Arts. It's complicated, that Minnesota Museum of American Art. We call them M. She has published in the Frida Kahlo Mexican Printmaking and the book Mexican Pop Art. Tonight, she will be touching on many topics, I'm sure, and especially us to navigate in what kind of work we could be making in a virtual art making in this pandemic world. Without further ado, here's Tina.
Thank you, Aki. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Good evening. I want to thank Forecast Public Arts and Aki Shibata for the change, the platform of this artist talk to be virtual in respect of the shelter in place. This precautionary measure to not meet in person is part of our new unprecedented reality. We must briefly sacrifice our usual rituals of gathering in the galleries as part of the survival strategy that we recognize. Now we recognize that we're interdependent, right? We each need to cease social interactions to help reduce the devastating consequences of this pandemic. We abide by this for the common good. We rely on each other to stay home, to benefit our society. I'm hoping our innovative ways of interaction will help us expand our creativity. As artist Alafir Eliasson states, art helps us identify with one another and expands our notion of we, from the global to the local. From the local to the global. So maybe gathering virtually can actually help influence the way we think and act as individuals to become a better society. I will admit, I was flattered to speak, but hesitant. Presenting is awkward enough without being virtual. But I considered the invitation a little intimidating because I was invited to speak as the 2019 recipient of the Early Career Artist Research and Development Grant. This Forecast Public Art Award was a research project. This was meant to be the planning phase of a public art installation. Yes, I completed the research project successfully, investigated similar projects, I studied methods, listed resources needed, made rosters of collaborators, a budget with cost analysis, all of the requirements to complete the detailed plan of action, including sketches of design ideas. However, the final product was a report and not a tangible piece of art brought to fruition that I could share with you today. This was imaginary, based on an idea. The final product was hypothetical based on a possible idea, relying on my assumptions of a plan. And then I realized a hypothetical mind is exactly what we need right now as artists. We've all been experiencing a series of postponed events, postponed grants, postponed exhibitions, and yes, might some be postponed, but many others will even be completely canceled due to this pandemic. So I decided I will have a virtual artist talk about my hypothetical exhibits and art events that were postponed or canceled during COVID-19. So bear with me to change. Hold on. Having technical difficulties already, not good. Oh, shoot. Okay, hold on. The more nervous I get. Okay, I'm using two screens, so I apologize. It won't go. Okay, here we go. I'm going to go to the center view. So the first that was canceled was a women's panel. It was scheduled to, yeah.
Aki, will you hit share screen?
Oh, yes, of course.
You can all see the presentation.
Sorry.
Thank you, Tina.
Yep. Okay. There we go. You hear me?
Looks good. We got it.
So the first cancellation was a panel of women artists scheduled for Thursday, March 19th. I was invited by Neetha Cloder, the Director of Education and Social Engagement. The panel included me, Gail Kendall, Laura Youngbird, and was going to be moderated by art history professor Anna Amar from the Minnesota State University Moorhead to explore issues of gender representation and legacy. So the panel was tied to the exhibition Generation, Women Artists in the Plain Museum, a collection, which was on display at Fargo, North Dakota from June 4th, 2019 to March 23rd, 2020. In an effort to promote women artists and accelerate gender equity in the collection, the Plains Art Museum organized this exhibition with 44 works by 40 women artists. What I appreciated most was their transparency and willingness to acknowledge the gender disparities in the collection, even in their own didactics and publicity, which stated, artworks in the collections of art museums around the world, including Plains Art Museum, are disproportionately dominated by men. Despite decades of critique, direct activism, and multiple waves of feminist art movements, women artists remain underpaid, underrepresented, and represent only 13% of artists in major US museum collections. I actually believe it's closer to 10%. Museums contribute to defining our cultural values, so a lack of women artists in the collection reflects how the values are defined by a certain part of society, most often the elite. Oops. Sorry about that. Oh my gosh, here we go. So here we go. This is the actual print that I made, and that is Paloma in 2009. As a woman artist, my visual arts practice has not been a traditional route due to family obligations, and financial restrictions. My artist advancements have been more of a family project. This is Paloma printing in 2009 at the Plains Museum. We probably don't know where Marcos is at the time, but that was commonplace. Now Paloma is 21 and Marcos is 23. So a lot of my earlier work focused more on gender roles. We printed the steamroller prints at the Plains Art Museum for a contemporary Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos celebration. There was also an ofrenda made by my husband Javier Tavera and I, as well as community programming. It was possible because of the collaboration between the former director Colleen Sheehy, Grupo Soap del Corazon, and Art.org. These projects have been successful as they incorporate cultural organizing. Much of my artistic development is because of community support, and which has provided me mentoring, artistic opportunities, not just in galleries and museums, but in grassroots settings and working with the community. Cultural organizing exists at the intersection of art and activism. It's about integrating arts and culture into organizing strategies. It's also about organizing from a particular tradition, cultural identity, community of place, or worldview. So here I am cutting the wood block in our garage with a router to make the steamroller print. Art is part of my lifestyle. It's a value that I see as essential in contributing to human well-being. Now look carefully at this photo. Do you see? Hold on. Sorry, the slide stuck. So as artists, in a way, we may be better prepared for this pandemic, as we are used to using safety procedures. In Mexico, there's a long history of relief prints, such as Guadalupe Posada's graphic broadsides that shared atrocities for audiences interested in scandalous legends combined with actual events. This is the large wood block that I made. It's 8 by 4 feet, titled Legendary Beauty. This piece is based on a real life story because I love legends and I love scandalous stories. This is about Rosa Maria Ojeda Cuen, who represented Miss Mexico and was a contestant from Sinaloa. She was the 2007 Miss Universe candidate in Mexico City. She wore a wide brim sombrero in a very controversial dress. Documented by the Associated Press, the pageant made her modify the dress, not because it's too slinky or low cut, but because the floor-length dress depicted scenes from the 1926 to 1929 Cristero War, an uprising by Roman Catholic rebels against Mexico's government, which was imposing anti-clerical laws. Tens of thousands of people died. The outfit included a bullet-studded belt and was accented with crosses, scapulars, symbols of religious devotion, such as a rosary. The designers argued it represented the nation's culture and history, especially since Mexico City was hosting the pageant that same May. Artistically, I think the designer was trying to help the pageant contestant show her knowledge of her cultural heritage and identity. But as I know, selecting imagery and iconography can be very challenging. The pageant administrators determined that the dress would be redesigned to include an image of the Virgen of Guadalupe, La Morenita, the brown lady, who in Mexico fixes everything. But that is another story for another print. Mexicans also protested the dress because at the moment in April 2007, in contemporary Mexico, the debate was heated about the Catholic Church's role in politics and its lobbying against a Mexico City proposal to legalize abortion. Social clashes were prevalent between religious conservatives and liberals, but feminists hailed the vote as a clear history. The print I designed included a 5 pesos bill and the iconic family immigration crossing symbol, referencing the effects of the Cristero War on immigration to the US. In the aftermath of their defeat, many of the Cristeros, by some estimates as much as 5% of Mexico's population, fled. The thematic grounds of my art stems from interdisciplinary, non-traditional education, a mixture of politics and the arts, and my work as an activist. My art draws attentions to topics that relate to us as social beings. The ambassador of Mexico to the United States, Martha Barcena Coqui, invited me to exhibit my art at the Mexican Cultural Institute in Washington, D.C. Of course, it was scheduled for March. Should I say I was going to exhibit? As this unprecedented art world mixes us up, it mixes up my verb tenses. I'm unclear what verb tense should I even use. Since the exhibit was postponed or potentially canceled, if it was postponed, then I would say the exhibit will be. If it is canceled, I guess I would say the next exhibit was supposed to be. So either way, if you say that something is supposed to happen, you mean that it is planned. The plan was to have it at the end of March, to have an artist residency and an exhibition. As an artist residing in Minnesota with dual citizenship between Mexico and the US, my focus is often on Latinidad within the United States. The exhibit titled Contar y Recontar, to count and recount, was meant to encourage people to complete the census 2020. Being raised in a bicultural, bilingual family, my mom is from Mexico, my dad is from St. Paul. They met in Mexico, married, and now reside in Minnesota. Therefore, at home, we are raised speaking Chilango, a Mexico City Spanish. Chilangos love to twist words and numbers are not an exception. In English, the only comparison I can even think of is maybe Pig Latin, because it is an imaginary language, typically spoken playfully to convey a sort of secrecy. I must emphasize that since my parents immigrated, the Chilango Spanish vocabulary we learned was also trapped in the 60s. So here we go. Uñas, dedos, tripas, cuadros, cinchos. I thought the image was appropriate for the census 2020. So the Costa series that I've created over the past probably 4 years includes more than 45 prints. And don't worry, because I won't go through all of them, but I have installed different versions of the prints in exhibitions. This is at the Tweed Museum this is at Augsburg University, I'm sorry, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The installation includes prints and paintings. One painting here on the wall actually has "Are You Hispanic?" It actually shows how the US government has decided on this term. So you'll see that I use prints and paintings combined on the wall. The Costa series has made sense with the Census 2020 as the US government needs to collect data measuring racial identity to make public policy decisions. One painting on the wall references the census term Hispanic. That is a classification fabricated by the US government to define those of Latin American descent. The dictionary definition states it is from Spain or from a Spanish-speaking country, which really asserts colonialism. Hispanic is an ethnic origin, not a race. Some respondents may answer identifying their family's country of origin, Mexican, Colombian, Peruvian, and others may focus on commonalities residing in the US, Latinx, Chicano, Chicana. It makes it challenging to tally and comprehend the total numbers. According to art historian Jamie Ratliff, the images I combined formulate their own visual bilingual language, expressing humor to address serious issues such as colonialism, racial classifications, and hierarchy of classes. Most Mexicans are mixed, part Spanish and part indigenous, but people don't usually identify with being mestizo. La Malinche, the Nahua native, with Hernán Cortés, the Spanish conquistador, is credited for overtaking the Aztecs. She was a victim of exploitation, a slave, a translator, and his mistress, and she birthed the first mestizaje child, now considered a traitor, even if most Mexicans are mestizo, Spanish indigenous. And this right here is an image where I combined the screen print with vintage media images such as comics, maps, and a calendar that reference sexual violence and family trauma. This is Rarotonga, one of Mexico's most popular Mexican historieta comic book characters. She fulfills the stereotype of an exotic woman, a brown-skinned, hypersexualized woman with mysterious eyes and afro hair. She's paired with genetic charts that delineate the genes necessary to result in her green eye color. The charts reference genotypes and phenotypes of inherited genetic identity. My artwork investigates the constructions of racial, ethnic, gender, national, and cultural identity via numerous mediums. And this is an example of the painting directly on the wall. My hope is that my artwork will challenge one's perceptions, perspectives, and assumptions, especially regarding stereotypes. Our society often associates facial and body hair with masculinity. Soft arch, structured arch, full arch, chola arch. So through an ethnographic lens, I identify and examine cultural signifiers determined by our society on how people define themselves and their cultures in everyday life. En busca de Pancho Villa, in search of Pancho Villa, screen print and drawing, the physical traits of the easily identifiable mustache are of famous Mexicans, including actors, political figures, revolutionaries, poet, comedian. Many Mexicans can identify each persona just by their mustache. The last image, though, is of the actor Orlando Bloom. disguised as a Mexican with a Pancho Villa Sharpie mustache. This piece here is a screen print of a fabricated cigar Puros box cover. The lettering says Pura Raza, pure race, a derogatory expression in Mexico for lower socioeconomic class. But the term has been appropriated by Latinos living in the US as a positive expression of cultural and social identity to mean mi gente, my people. Fui a una tocada y hubo pura raza. La China Poblana is the easily identifiable iconic woman in traditional dress from Puebla. Legends say she was Filipino slave in Mexico. In my print, I've portrayed her as a crusader for gender and sexual equality by depicting her smoking a cigar, a stereotypical gender-based ritual considered exclusively for men. The phallic plants represent a tobacco plantation production chart comparing sexual physical traits by country. The infamous Chicano, Chichmarin. Chicano, Chicana, once the term Little Mexican, Chicanito. If you were born in the US, it was a derogatory term expressed lower social class. According to scholar Elizabeth Martinez, during the 60s and 70s, the term became an outcry of pride, peoplehood, and a rejection of assimilation. The woman is referencing a folk metaphor, con el nopal en la frente, with a cactus on the forehead. Similarly, the expression can be a derogatory in Mexico, based on discrediting someone who has native physical characteristics, and in the US, pertaining specifically to Mexican immigrants who attempt to assimilate by casting aside their native culture. Interestingly enough, the term now is being appropriated by Mexican Americans in the US, who commonly use the phrase to express loyalty to their country of origin. My artwork is not meant to define classifications, but instead explore how people express their identity, and it questions what unifies us. Besides mitigating racial issues, my artwork analyzes related societal stratifications such as citizenship, immigration, and social economic disparity. At the Mexican Cultural Institute, the next gallery, this gallery right here, was to be about immigration. The subject matter links my artwork as the materials vary between projects. So refugio, refuge, is a shelter made of Latin American burlap bags. It was inspired by a friend, Sean Chadwick, who collaborated with me to collect the coffee bags. Most of the coffees produced worldwide are from Latin America. Many of these countries have shifted their agriculture to become monocrops due to profitable harvests from international trade and export economies. This can lead to socio-economic problems when interwoven with agricultural crisis combined with political instability. The result is often mass migration of asylum seekers who complete dangerous journeys when they flee their country. The exiled refugees are required to find temporary residence along the way. Migrants create shelters built for survival from materials readily available, whether natural or man-made. The lodging is a safe place to protect themselves from animals, insects, and the elements they reach their destination, until they reach their destination. So this is a hypothetical shelter, and the installation behind is titled Stains Marking Time, Manchas Marcando el Tiempo. And unless life marks off segments, time is a dimension without measure. Ruth F. Brin. Stains marking time. Time is relative. When one thinks something will not last forever, they mark the time. Cultures mark time with calendars, an hourglass, seasons, or a harvest. For many, the regimented consumption of coffee, drinking marks our day, without much consideration regarding the origin of the imported product. The barbed wire drawn on the coffee filters marks the most common paths of the migrants, as you can see here, from Mexico through Central America and to the United States. So part of an immigrant's identity is often marked with segments of time, divided between living in their native lands and the arrival into their new country. This segment of time is definitive and becomes part of their identity and is often mentioned in social settings when visiting with other immigrants. Mucho gusto. ¿Y tú cuánto tiempo llevas acá? According to art historian Jamie Ratliff, the images I combine formulate a visual language, a bilingual language, expressing humor to address serious issues such as colonialism, racial classifications, and hierarchy of classes. The two roosters fighting, kikiriki and kakadoodle, two languages saying the same thing. This is my mom, sister, and I in Mexico. So, since my parents immigrated to the United States and they speak Spanish to each other, the Chilango Spanish they speak is trapped in the 60s. My dad, whenever he answers the phone, will actually say, "Cubo, what up?" As an artist, I'm often asked, what are you working on now? For me, the creative process of art making is a learning process, which helps me understand my reality and the world. So this is a good time to reflect on our creative process. So do you write with your heart or do you write with your nails, your long nails, your nicely manicured nails? Do you create art because you have something to say? It is disappointing to have postponed and canceled events, but we can learn this new technology, I think. I'm starting to have doubts after tonight. But we've transitioned before, learning new skills. As some of you recall, writing on a typewriter. This is our time to experiment. This is the last exhibition I will mention, Sumigir and Resurgir, Submerge and Remerge, a portfolio exhibition organized by Ruthann Godoli, canceled and postponed. Puerto Rico, cuánto ha sufrido. Exhibit was supposed to be in Puerto Gráfico, a print conference in San Juan, Puerto Rico. But it made me realize that we can get through this. We have weathered other storms. We have come to realize that even with the best plan, things may not happen the way we expected. Take things step by step and be flexible. Now is a good time to dream, to experiment, to rely on one another, to figure out what unifies us. Maybe this pandemic is unifying us globally. Remember, we need to think hypothetically and always, always, always maintain a hypothetical mind of what is possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina.
Stop share.
So I'm going to give audience maybe a couple minutes here, since this interaction is actually by written communication. So if you do have any questions, Tina, please type into the Q&A that appears at the bottom of your screen. And whatever the Q&A comes in, I will moderate to start speaking. Tina and I, myself, can see your questions. So let's take a quick reflective moment to think about questions if you have any. And we'll start there.
It's a little awkward. I'm so used to being in a gallery and you can stand in front of the piece, and then you can simply point something out, or someone can ask a question and you can go back to that piece or that, I don't know.
Tina, would this be helpful? There's actually a function, people can raise hands in here.
Okay.
And if I see raised hands, I can unmute the microphone of the participants. We cannot see their face, but it can be a little bit more conversational.
Yeah.
Do you want to try that?
Sure.
Okay. So if you have questions that you're typing into the Q&A, use the function of raise hands, and then I have functions to be able to unmute your microphone. Oh, I see one raised hand. Oh wait, even lower. All right. Amanda, I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
Oh, no, not her. Just kidding. I'm just teasing.
Go ahead.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, Amanda, you can talk now.
Excellent. So I wanted to ask Tina if she could talk a little bit more about the portfolio that she participated in for Puerto Gráfico. What was it about? What were themes? And how was it going to be part of the conference? So we can kind of take ourselves there.
I was seeing if I could possibly show it, right?
You can click share screen, Tina, if you want to go back to that.
Monitor, so. Yeah, so here, you see it? Oh. Not working. I don't know what happened. You see it?
Do you want to hit the present?
Sorry, I'll just answer. So, yeah, what happened is it was actually a print conference, and we Ruth Angadoli curated the exhibition. I can't think of off the top of my head how many artists participated, but you actually create a portfolio, meaning that you edition the print and then you exchange the prints that were made. The conference then hosts a lot of different exhibitions and portfolios of printmakers or print aficionados, I would say. And the set of prints that we were showing was Sumergir and Resurgir, which was basically about Puerto Rico's sufferings and the struggles that they've had. And therefore, it actually was different perspectives of each artist on how they viewed Puerto Rico's situation and the struggles that Puerto Rico has been going through. And so here's, I can actually, what I can do is I can pull it up individually. No. So I can't, won't let me. Anyway, so the print that I created was actually a United States bill, and it was meant to represent the United States' inability to help because of our government's decisions, and the struggles that Puerto Rico has had was represented by the creature coming out of the sea to bring it down, and then the torments of the wind and the palm trees. But each artist really did their style of printmaking, which varied from wood block, screen printing, lithography, all these different methods. And then all of those perspectives were going to be brought together and in an exhibition at El Arsenal in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I don't know if that answered your question. Are you there?
Thank you, Tina. Here's another question. What is the most rewarding project that you have ever done?
You want to ask another question or ask a question? I can type from Eric.
Oh, I'm sorry. Amanda, did Tina answer your question?
Yeah, she did.
Awesome. Sorry, without checking in with you, I moved on to the next question.
No worries, no worries.
Thank you, Amanda. I will mute your mic. So Tina, here's the next question. What is the most rewarding project that you have ever done?
Oh my gosh. Wow, that's hard. That's really hard. I don't know. You know, I think there's so many different ways of creating. And I think for me, the most exciting part is actually thinking about something I'm trying to express and then trying to come up with the iconography that best communicates that thought. And so therefore, it's more so like the moment that I figure out what that iconography is going to be, and then being able to share it. I think the Costa series really took off, and the reason I probably made close to 50 prints was I really enjoyed the fact that the Latino community could relate to a lot of the stories that I was telling. And it's challenging because unfortunately in this country, we don't learn a lot about Mexico's history or Chicano history. And therefore I rely on people having a little bit of background knowledge. And so sometimes just when I would see people in the gallery and they would be cracking up, I really just enjoy when like they got it. They understood my iconography and they understood the humor behind it and hopefully received some sort of message.
So here are actually related questions to that and kind of touching on the language. The one audience asked, in your work related to Chicalingo Spanish, how do you navigate the response from the audience who may not understand the references? And this is some audience has been thinking about in their own work when they incorporate the language that outside of English. Do you want to speak a little bit about how you're incorporating language outside of English and navigating all those?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. Like sometimes my audience might be limited by the art, what I'm expressing at times, and other times I think hopefully some things come across. But basically, the art itself, I think when I show it, I sometimes feel like I have to communicate a lot more about the works. Like I have to provide a lot of background knowledge. I can't just say when the conquistador arrived. I mean, people might not know the conqueror Mexico came, where they come from, and what country and what time period. I mean, there's a lot of historical data and political information that's in my art. So artist talks like these, I think, are really helpful because it really allows me as the artist to share the background information. And sometimes I think that my artwork might need more labeling than other shows, I would imagine.
Thank you, Tina. So here's other questions. Tina, by the way, there's about 8 more questions to go through. So just
early, so that's good.
Yeah, it's great. It's kind of a virtual conversation here a little bit. Some folks are wondering about your learning through the process. What does the process looks like when you're making arts?
So when I want to create something, I'm actually thinking about what I want the message to be. And so one thing that I've found challenging is that I actually switch up the mediums often. And then it's more difficult, even if I've quit. For instance, I haven't done a woodblock in a while. It might take me some time just to remember and get back on track. I must admit, I rely on a lot of people in the community, the arts community and the Latino community that back me up and provide support. So it can be really communal, my art production, and I can then put together a piece dependent on what I'm trying to say. So I will then pick the medium and I guess, so a lot of my works will be site specific as well, such as Refugio was actually for an exhibition organized by Billy Franklin at Concordia. So I really sometimes need that deadline to set the pace that I will take in completing the works.
And a kind of a process related question. Here is one question that came in the last 4 or 5 years. What have you learned about yourself or your environment learning a new process or making art?
Oh, what have I learned? I think that's why I make art. I've come to the realization that one of my core values for the Shandinistas out there, is actually knowledge. I have this need to learn, and I think that making the art actually stretches me into having to study and research a topic and really grasp the history, the background, the politics, and understanding the situation better so that I can incorporate it into my artwork.
Thank you. That's really great to hear, Tina. Here's questions related to what has been canceled or postponed because of the current event. And how do you imagine yourself when we return to normalcy? Are you going to pursue the same venues, galleries, and talks, or are you going to think new ways that our artists can interact and show? And then that kind of a related questions of that kinds is coming in. How do you reimagine, or how artists as a leader moving forward, creating and living in this new normal, but yet when we go back to maybe a normal way as before, what has been changed, and how do you imagine that worlds to be for yourself?
I think that it's really, I mean, I worry more about those artists that the repercussions financially and socioeconomically will set them back. You know, survivals comes first. But I do think that this is time for us to reflect on the work that we've been creating. I think that it gives us a time to look at, you know, our portfolios and look at our resumes and think about like what direction we're headed. I think, you know, you have this little time to breathe and to make a plan so that you can use the time, even if we aren't able to exhibit, to organize the way we present ourselves publicly, whether it's a website, whether it's working on our imagery, working on our technology skills is definitely something that would be helpful. And then just trying to take things step by step, because I think we need to be flexible. Really, nobody knows how long this is going to last. And the arts relies heavily on the gathering, the ritual of the gathering. And that's what I think is really a struggle for us that are used to interacting more and seeing the artwork that's being created. So finding new ways to share the artwork is important as well. And then just maybe finding ways to experiment.
So here is a question that gets into a little bit more detail, perhaps. One participants have asked, can you explain further the hypothetical idea of the plan? Are you thinking more in the hypothetical?
I think so, because right now we have no idea how long this is going to last. And we have no idea, even when we can gather, what that's going to look like. I mean, you know, the uncertainty of what lies ahead is so scary for so many of us, for all of us, I would think. And so I think that it's part of the situation is just trying to imagine maybe different options of what is possible, and just thinking about if you are going, once you are able to create that work, eventually, what are you going to do? And sometimes that's the way I work anyways. Like I will think about a print. The Puerto Rico print was a particular struggle for me. I couldn't get the feeling of a storm and uncertainty in that print. I couldn't figure out just how to make the waters look unsettling. And so I think sometimes we just need to take it step by step and hypothetically think what would be possible if things do open up, but then also what is possible if we need to delay this a little longer and find new ways to create, or new places. Because, you know, for instance, right now, High Point Center for Printmaking is closed. And, you know, a lot of us printmakers are limited with how much we can do, but that's sometimes how it's done. I mean, I know in Mexico, there's a lot of people that print without much, you know, resources.
Thanks. Here's maybe a little bit different directions of question here, but can you talk a little bit more about the idea of time and mark in your work?
The idea of time, did you say?
Time and mark.
Oh, you mean how it marks time?
Yeah.
So the piece that I did with the coffee filters, well, the coffee filters were from Brad Smith, by the way. I don't know if he's listening, but I have an obsession with my daily coffee ritual. I won't deny that. So I get up every day and I get my 2 cups of coffee, and it's kind of like marks my day as starting. And I started to think about that when I started thinking about like where the coffee comes from. And it was at the same time that we were talking about um, migration from Central America and these countries that produce the coffee. And so what I was talking about though is that when people come from another country and begin living here in the United States, they so often can remember clarity of the day they came. And so they can tell you if it was, 17 years ago, they'll, and it marks like the relationship between the before and after. It marks like before they arrived and since they arrived. I mean, it's a marker in place. And I find it interesting that when people are interacting that are immigrants to this country, it's often the first thing they'll say to each other. They'll ask each other, how long have you been here? And they'll know right off the top of their head. They won't have to think about it. And it is part of their identity. So when they're communicating to each other, they're greeting each other, it's a very common topic to be brought up, is how their time is marked.
I can be relates to that myself, being immigrant here. We talk all constant. Oh, what year were you moved here? And it's very interesting how we actually have that as a mark. Yeah, totally. Kind of conversations about migrant populations, immigrations. Here's a questions about how do you think this your arts and the messages you're sharing can reach more people, especially when the migrant population is so mobile. What do you think about how to get your message out to more people?
Yeah, I mean, I showed in this presentation mostly my work with museums, but I do work in the community, and I have done a lot of community events as well. I mean, we live in the Powderhorn area, and we have done a lot of projects on Lake Street and are going to do more. I think that it's part of it is the ownership of where you are and where you live and who you're interacting with in your community. Who do you consider is your community? And so I think though that like I say, if this is an opportunity to go from locally to globally, I mean, I think that it can be as local as our community, or it can definitely expand. And as we're learning these new techniques like Zoom, I think we could even expand it farther.
Yeah, so here's last maybe 2 questions in one. And once that answers over, we will end our artist talk. But one question is that one audience said, I love your idea of hypothetical mind. Is that maybe what artists often maintain? A place of creativity or possibility. So that idea of our hypothetical you carry and you talked about tonight. And also I felt like that question relates to, so what now, right? Postponed or canceled events in which we invested time and energies to, sometimes hoping that those events might make change in this political moments. And for institutions out there are still having funding available, do you have any suggestions about how we can work to create virtual events that would fund artists and important work that they are doing during this critical time? So, what is your hypothetical minds that continue for you to in a creative way, and as well as what is that suggestion you may have thinking about this political climate and investment. Like, we have invested a lot of times to what we all are doing. So kind of double-edged sword here, but do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So the hypothetical mind, I mean, I think my limitations might be in the technology on trying to figure out how to do these things, but I think we're all advancing so quickly in learning Zoom or learning other techniques to communicate and show. I know there's artists too. John Sherman's been organizing like events that are in people's front yards, or there's going to be some level of interaction even if we maintain our social distancing once the weather changes in Minnesota. And I think we need to think about what resources we have and what is possible while still being safe. And that's going to maybe feel different for different people. So we need to take that into consideration as well. I worry not just about the artists, but I also worry about art institutions, because this is a financial blow to many art institutions, especially the smaller ones that might be even more at risk. There's so much arts in the Twin Cities, and it's been sustained by people who are dedicated to maintaining art spaces and galleries with very limited resources. So I think that's what I was talking about, to think about when we talk about the hypothetical mind is that we need to work as a group. We need to figure out what unifies us, what are the possible things that we could do together to sort through this and to come up with some ideas, some creative ideas. I mean, we are artists, so hopefully there'll be more people, but I think the best thing to do is to not be stagnated by this. I think a lot of people are so frustrated by the cancellations or the postponed shows that they actually block themselves. And this is the time that we really need to stretch ourselves and figure out ways that we can continue to do our art. And maybe it's not going to be with the same access to resources, but there can be ways that we figure out how to interact. And I think that there's many art institutions that are searching for ideas and artist energy to make that happen.
Yeah, and just from the forecast side, I do want to kind of plug in here that, first of all, May 6th, Hawana and Candidas, who creating this a toolkit, is going to have a webinar, and I hope you can tune in to think about and see what are some of the possibility of having the gathering, having the arts, creativity all out there without being physically close to stay safe. And also at the Forecast Public Art website, it's downloadable. Anyone can access to it, of this toolkit of how to gather, how to create, and how to continue on our work. So hopefully that can be helpful for you who ask these questions. And I think many of us is actually wondering about what in the world, right? How can we change our way of organizing and making arts and being out there? So thank you for taking a stab at that, Tina. And I totally agree with what you're saying in that. And we do need to keep creating, and we do need to think about what is our common threads and keeping us together, and us as artists and creatives. And there's one last question, and I think we have a time to answer it. I'm going back to the artwork with the coffee filters and coffee bean bags, and one audience is wondering about tell a little bit more about how you are linking the idea of coffee and migration. So
they're asking how I tied together the idea of coffee and migration. Yeah. So the installation was two parts. So one was the refuge, which was the hypothetical shelter, and then that was actually made with the coffee bags, the burlap coffee bags. And then the ones on the wall were the filter installations. So they were actual real coffee filters that had been used from a coffee shop. And the way that I tied it to Latin America immigrants is that we rely on importing coffee. Most coffee all over the world comes from, I mean, a large percentage anyways, comes from Central and South America, Latin America, I should say. And then we import it and we consume it without much thought where it's coming from. But what happens in these countries often is that it becomes a monocrop. So instead of farming for you and your family and growing your own subsistence farming, for instance, to feed your family, it's lucrative to convert farms or land to produce coffee in large quantities to export to the United States. So countries transition and they start to have monocrops where only one crop is grown, and they're completely reliant economically on this coffee product and the income that it brings into the country. And then when there's agricultural crisis or there's some sort of political instability, the crop isn't functioning to feed the family, and the crop is not functioning to provide for the society. And so therefore, a lot of people are uprooted and they're desperate and they cannot find a means to survive and have a livelihood, and will end up sometimes even taking the journey of trying to travel to the United States in search of asylum. And this is not an easy decision. You have to be at the point where you have absolutely nothing to stay for, to take some sort of risky life. And some people have walked, thousands of miles through Central America, through Mexico to get to the United States. So the shelter that I designed was made out of the bags that specifically had marketing, branding, I should say, of from Latin America. And then on the wall was the coffee filters, which were laid out almost like a calendar marking days. But the barbed wire that I drew that was going across the coffee filter actually started in the bottom left-hand corner and then traveled upwards and then divided into three, representing the three different most common routes that immigrants take from Central America to go through Mexico to get to the United States. So I hope that did that answer. That was a little long.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Tina. We were able to go through all the questions, and let me double check. Yep. And this was very great. And then last, do you have thoughts about learning this new platform of webinars and virtual artist talk? Is this a hypothetical becoming real?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Forecast, because I think that as the artist expressed that this is a time of uncertainty, and I think the first thing naturally is to freeze up and be limited by it. And I really appreciate that Forecast takes the initiative to do an artist talk. I think that other places will be doing something virtually. They'll be doing more and more. And I look forward to seeing more work being produced.
Yeah, so the April 25th, just a quick reminder, we are hosting kind of a Zoom gathering places with the POC, Black Indigenous artists, all coming together to talking about community and spaces, what kind of work that we can do. And May 6th, once again, the toolkits to think about post-pandemic artwork and gathering and public arts. Juana and Candidas will be leading that webinar. And May 21st, Miri Beeryard will be having the artist talk, just like you, Artina, to be able to share the work that's happening in Nadurus and public arts that Miri is producing. So thank you very much for coming.
It's on the website? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, it's on the websites and as well as the Facebook, and Forecast have Twitters as well. And Wow, I don't know if that is on the Instagram, like events and Instagram don't mix well in my mind, but maybe it is. Jen Dolan, do you know? But I think that a lot of information can be found on the Facebook, especially more details and website. So hopefully I get to see you all on this virtual platform and keep talking and keep learning together and keep kind of finding the new awareness and new normal. So I think we'll end here tonight. Thank you so much, Tina.
Thank you, Aki. Bye.
Yeah. Have a great night, y'all.
Bye.